over to them because it looks like we're starting a couple minutes, 3 minutes late. So this is Abby and this is Bart, and I'm going to turn it over to them.
Hey, Abby. Hi, Bart.
Hi.
Hi, Karina. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
It's good to see you.
Okay, so this year we have a bunch of new students, so we haven't heard what you had to say last year. So don't worry that you're just repeating yourself, because you're not.
Since it's new year, we've been working on new projects. We've been studying about the reintro of wolves into the wild and whatnot, trying to get those back in there. And we've been studying human rights and how those work. And right now, this month, we've been working on how to storytell properly.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your job and what it entails?
Sure. So my job is to work down here full-time in Olympia and on behalf of a number of different organizations. Different people who are advocates work in different ways. So do you guys want a little bit of how a bill becomes a law 101? Is that helpful, or do you want to do that at a different time?
Yes,
great.
let's hear it.
Thank you.
Okay. So folks may know sort of how the national politics works and how the national government works, and Washington State is very much the same. So I'm down here in Olympia at the Capitol, not the Capitol in Washington, D.C. We have 49 different districts here in Washington State that each of which elect a senator and 2 representatives to represent you. So if you live in downtown Spokane, you're in the 3rd legislative district and you have a senator, Senator Andy Billig, and you have 2 representatives, Representative Marcus Riccelli, and why am I blanking? He's going to be really pissed. Representative Tim Ormsby, who's the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and they're all Democrats. And different parts of the state have each district have 3 representatives, and there's a fixed number of, I think it's like 150,000 or 250,000 people per legislative district, and that gets carved up every census every 10 years and sort of adjusts to show based on where population has changed. So sometimes Spokane has more representatives, sometimes it has fewer, depending on how it's grown versus other parts of the state. For example, Vancouver, Washington, and the suburbs around Seattle have been growing a ton in the last 10 years. So it'll be interesting to see. They may get more representatives just based on having more people there when the next census is done and they redistrict and sort of shuffle the areas. So you got House of Representatives that has 98 members. That's 2 reps per district, and the state Senate that has 1 senator per district, and that comes up with the 3 folks that I mentioned for you who are in downtown, live in the downtown Spokane area or immediately in Spokane city limits. A piece of legislation gets introduced, or somebody comes up with a good idea. Maybe you guys come up with an idea for, hey, I think that we should have different graduation requirements, and you go to your legislator and they put that in a bill. They introduce that into the process, and then it has to go through a series of hoops, going through different committees in the House of Representatives. And then if it passes the House of Representatives, then it goes to a series of committees in the state Senate. And then if it passes through all those hoops, then it goes under the governor's office to get him to sign it. And so when you're putting together a law, you're trying to get as many folks as possible, obviously, to sign on to that, and you got to get a majority of those bodies. So with 98 members in the House, you need to get 50 votes to be able to get your bill out of the House of Representatives. With 49 members in the state Senate, you got to get 25 of them to vote in favor of it to get it out of the state Senate, and then you got to get the governor's signature. So I always sort of portray the lawmaking process. It's about ideas and it's about persuasion. And as you said, Bart, about telling the story, it's also about math, right? It's about what does it take to get 50 plus 25 plus 1, right? If you can get that math product, that equals a law, even if it's the stupidest idea ever invented. As long as if you have the votes, you're a winner. So my job is to get to know the ins and outs of the process. What does it take to get a bill introduced? What does it take to make changes to that? follow the schedule for the hearings and so forth, because we'll have public hearings before they take any action on a bill, to hear all the different sides of the story, who likes the bill. Maybe we'll use, you guys want to change graduation requirements, and so you and other folks who support that come and show up and give testimony. On the other side, maybe one of the school districts doesn't like that because they want to keep the requirements where they are, and they come in and they give testimony in front of the committee, and then I say I'm representing you as your lobbyist. I go and talk to all the members of that committee to try to make sure that we have a majority of the members on that committee that will vote yes for what we want. They'll say, well, hey, the Mead school district says this is going to cause a problem because XYZ, and I say, Mead, don't listen to them. Here's what you really want to know. Here's what the folks at Mead School say, and why it's a good idea. And they're students, and they know better than those stupid adults that just want to keep them back. And so what you should do is vote in favor of the legislation. Sorry to pick on the Mead School District, but whatever. Anyway, so my job is to represent different organizations down here in Olympia with what they need. So one of my main clients is the nonprofit organization United Way. And so I represent United Ways all across the state, and they get together when the legislature is not here and come up with, what do we want to ask the legislature to do? Do we need money for programs? Do we need to get the law changed to give people more opportunity or make things easier for someone? What is it that we need to do? And so then I work with that organization to come up with a piece of legislation. I figure out which one of the representatives is the best to work with, that has the greatest interest in that, or is the most powerful to be able to get that done. And I go meet with them. So again, if you were wanting to change your graduation requirements, I would say, hey, let's go talk to Senator Billig, because he's on the Senate Ways and Means Committee, and the Senate Education Committee. So he's on a couple committees that can decide what the policy is and what the money is going to be. And so I'd bring some of you and Karina and maybe some parents with me, and we'd sit down over there in Spokane and meet with Senator Billig and say, hey, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the solution that we are striving for, our goal, and here's the piece of legislation that we have that gets us from point A to point B. And maybe it needs some money, and we put that in the conversation and in our request. And here's the language that we want to have accomplished. And then he works with us to make sure that he gets it right. He introduces a bill, works with the staff down here in Olympia that are expert at figuring out how to put it in the law just the right way so it'll work. And then we get that introduced. And then my job again is to sort of bird dog that process, make sure it gets introduced properly, make sure other legislators sign on as sponsors, make sure it can get a hearing. I go talk to Senator Billig, and I go talk to the chair of the committee and say, hey, we'd really like to have a hearing on this bill so people can have the opportunity to move this forward. And I do that at every step of the process. When the process was set up, our process follows very closely what the process is in Washington, D.C. And back 200 whatever years ago, when Madison set up the U.S. Constitution, he established the process so it is very hard to get anything done, right? The whole point is to make it difficult and make you have to really do your job and work hard to get over each hurdle in the process to get a law, because you don't want stupid laws made, right? So you have to prove yourself over and over again at every step of the process to prove your case. And sometimes that can mean 4 or more hearings, multiple times that they're going to vote on stuff, changes to the bill, et cetera, to try to hit the mark just right and make sure that everybody in the community and in the community of expertise on that has the opportunity to have impact on that. So my job is, the process's job is, it's a big hill, right? So my job is to keep pushing that rock up the hill, and then you pass the House or you pass the Senate, and the rock rolls back down the other side, and then you got to push it back up again in the opposite house to make sure it gets to the governor. And so that's my job, and I do that for a bunch of different organizations. I work for, as I said, United Way. I work for Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, which gets funding for homeless programs and affordable housing for folks who can't afford it without some sort of assistance. I work for SEIU 775, which is a union that represents the workers that take care of seniors and persons with disabilities in their own homes. I work for Pioneer Human Services, which does chemical dependency treatment for folks and does job training for folks coming out of prison to help them get back reintegrated into the community and once they've been in prison for some time. I work for Fairfax Hospital, which is a hospital that does mental health treatment in East King County, and and so those are a number of my larger clients that I work for. And as you can tell, a lot of them sort of fit together, right? Homelessness, affordable housing, nonprofit issues, chemical dependency, mental health, because you scratch the surface on one of those and oftentimes come up with one of the other things. So sorry that that's a really long description of what I do, but I wanted to sort of put the process together so you have a sort of picture of the roadmap of what it is that we're trying to deal with to get from a good idea to getting a law in place. And sort of how I plug into that process is, again, to help push it over those hoops that or over those hills and hurdles that the process has built into it by the framers of the Constitution. And again, we work on state issues, the big stuff on the national level. You hear the big tax cuts and Obamacare and national defense and the military and international relations. That's all federal stuff with Congress and the president, whose name I don't mention. I don't like him very much. Sorry, I'm probably not supposed to editorialize here on public time. But anyway, sorry. That's them. Here in Washington State, what we're dealing with is a microcosm of the same thing, but with Washington values. And so we have Governor Inslee, and then this year we have the House and the Senate are controlled by the Democratic Party by just one vote, which means if any one Democrat decides that they don't like the idea that's to them and they vote no, you got to find a Republican to vote for it instead. And so it's that, very close balance of power. And again, everybody from very liberal folks who want to see government programs move forward and expand, potentially with new taxes, to very conservative folks who think that government may be already doing too much and that people are overtaxed. And you got to get a majority of those folks on board and sort of steer a middle course in order to get something enacted, to get that 50, 25, and 1 that I mentioned earlier to be able to get something to be a law. I'll shut up now and let you ask more questions. Sorry about that.
That's good.
Reader can assert I answer very complicated ways to very simple questions.
I love it.
Yeah, it was a good one. So what would a typical day for you look like while being a lobbyist?
But, it's very, very glamorous. No. Yeah, me and my 12th man water bottle, very glamorous. So it depends. I mean, yesterday I had a bunch of hearings that I had to go to. Sometimes I needed to testify at them. Sometimes I just needed to be there to hear what was going on, so I had a clearer sense of what the issues are on both sides. Some I had people that I work for who are testifying, and I needed to make sure they had everything they needed, that they were feeling comfortable with the process, because it can be intimidating, right, for folks to come down here and testify and folks to stuff. There's cameras and there's marble and there's fancy furnishings and all that stuff, and that can be a little intimidating, even to me as somebody who's done this for 26 years. It's sort of daunting if you're Joe Blow off the street and you just want to talk about a problem that you have that needs to be solved, and there's all this stuff surrounding it. And that's another part of my job, is to try to strip some of the myth away from the process, to have respect for the process, because we have to, be polite, we have to follow the rules, et cetera, but also how we can, as human beings, interact with the process that sometimes tries to keep particularly Joe Blow, rather than powerful interests, away from the center of power. And so my job is to be the icebreaker for that, both in a process way as well as to help people feel comfortable. So a lot of my job is, sort of keeping an eye on what all those hearings are. Then I meet with legislators to talk about the range of issues, right? And, they may be talking to, and it's in 15-minute chunks when we get to sit down and meet with your legislators. So they may be talking about about campaign finance reform for 15 minutes, and then I come in and I talk about funding programs for homeless families, and then the next person coming in is talking about highways, and the person after that is talking about prisons, and the next person is talking about the education system. And so the legislators just have all this, stuff coming at them fast and furious. And so again, a big part of my job is to boil all that down so that it's easily digestible for them. I leave them with a piece of paper behind that says, A, B, C, here are the things that, that you need to remember about this bill. Please vote yes when it comes to you in committee, right? So that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle when they talk to the transportation guy after me and the K-12 education person, et cetera, et cetera. And so what can I do, as you said, Bart, to frame the message, to cut through the clutter, because there is a lot of clutter along with all the hurdles that you have to go over. So my job is doing whatever it takes, meeting with legislators to let them know about what I'm working on, being a part of the hearing process if I need to make sure that they're getting the information they need, either from me or from somebody I work for. And a lot of it is talking to my colleagues, right? Because information is a valuable resource. The more you know, the more you can get done. And so talking to my colleagues, hey, did you hear about this? Wow, what have you heard about that? And being able to put all those pieces together based on our 15-minute conversations with different folks. Hey, I just met with so-and-so. He said this. Oh, that's interesting. So-and-so's on the other side of that, and they said this. Oh, okay. So how can we fit those together? This guy's saying he wants something to happen. This guy's saying he's skeptical about it. How can we fit those pieces together to get them both to vote yes? So that's sort of a typical day for me. And it's here up on the Capitol campus where there's, we sit in the, it's like you guys, we sit in the cafeteria and we talk to our friends and we talk to our, sometimes our frenemies and figure out a path forward and talk to legislators about, what's going to make them feel more comfortable about doing stuff. And then checking in with clients back home. Somebody may say, hey, what's happening? There was supposed to be a vote yesterday. I didn't see if there was a vote, and letting them know what that looks like. So that's sort of the process that I go through on a daily basis. And then, it depends. It depends on what the needs are. It depends on what's happening on any given day. If there's a lot of hearings, it means I'm locked into some blocks of time to do that. If there's not a lot of hearings, that means I'm freer to float around and talk to my colleagues and figure out what's going on and meet with legislators if I have some appointments scheduled to try to get to the bottom of whether they're going to vote yes, what they can do to help, talk to their colleagues, et cetera. It's always about moving the needle farther towards success, moving people who are on the fence or don't have a lot of knowledge about the issue to being supportive, to folks who are supportive, to move them to be, actively supporting and willing to sort of go to battle for us. The folks that are super against it, maybe I can give them some information so they're not as against it. They'll still maybe vote no or be grumbly about it, but they're not going to, have a fit about it. Or getting these folks on the no side to at least be open to more information and maybe able to push them over on the other side of the hill to being able to support something. So that's the process. Sorry, long answer.
No worries. So how did you get this job, and what sparked your interest in becoming an activist for these?
So my parents were both elected officials. My dad was a city council person and my mom was a school board member in the little town I grew up in Oregon. So I was always sort of, hosed in terms of I was stuck with some sort of career in politics or government, right? So I went to school and graduate school for, political science and public administration, and then thought that I would probably work within government and worked in government for a couple of years, but decided I didn't like just being able to make recommendations. I didn't like just to be able to sort of analyze all the facts and then, hand that over to someone and say, here is my recommendation. Do what you will in your perfect wisdom to do it, because sometimes they wouldn't do it. I wanted to be able to say, and here's why you should do it. And here's what this guy thinks, and here's what that guy thinks. And we're going to push on you. We're not going to take no for an answer. As a staff person, you got to take no for an answer and do whatever the elected official says. As an advocate, I could say, all right, so you say no, you don't like it because of this. how do we figure out how to dissolve that clot, right? How do we get past that problem so that we can overcome that and get you to yes, which you can't do as staff. So that's why I wanted to be an advocate, because it's cool. I mean, all the stuff I get to work at, you know, people with chemical dependency issues, people with mental health issues, folks who are having difficulty affording basic needs, including housing, you know, helping increase wages for people who are taking care of our seniors and get paid horribly for doing very difficult jobs. You know, that's all part of my values. And so I get paid to walk the walk on my value set. Pitch me, right? What a great job to have. And so, you know, it can be a little chaotic, and you work with some difficult people who have very different views of the world than you do. But that's why I love it. And so, because you get to, you know, you get to be action oriented about things that really matter. It get really exhausting and depressing sometimes too, when you run into a buzzsaw of somebody who's like, oh, the homeless, they brought it on themselves. They made bad choices. You know, they should suffer. I mean, nobody ever says they should suffer, but you know, that's sort of what's in the back of their head, right? They made bad choices. Why should we give them money since they've made bad choices? Because gee whiz, everybody deserves a second chance. Or there, but for the grace of God, go any of us. Or hey, you know, help them change the tire on their you know, car of life and help them get forward onto the, you know, onto the road or whatever. And you know, so sometimes I bang my head against a wall about, you know, just a very different view of the world that some people have, and that can be very, very, very discouraging. And sometimes that means that it takes years, literally years, to get some stuff passed that you would say is just totally obvious, right? This is what we have to do. Here's all the research that shows here's what you have to do. There's plenty of support for doing this. It doesn't cost a lot of money, or maybe it does cost some money, but it's worth it because we know that it's going to get results. And somebody can just still say no, because they don't believe that that's the role of government to help with that. They don't believe that those people deserve a second chance. They don't believe that we should be putting money towards this versus something else that they prioritize higher. And so again, it's my job to always push on that. Oh, you care about schools instead of giving money to the homeless. Did you know that we have tens of thousands of homeless kids in our school system that are trying to do their homework by the dome light in their family's minivan? Do you think those kids are going to be as successful in being able to pass these graduation requirements that you consider all holy? Well, guess what? If we provide some services to make sure that people can have better opportunities, we find a place for people to live so that kids and their families are able to thrive better. Guess what? Everybody wins. And yes, it costs a little bit of money, but would you rather be spending the money to give people a hand up, or would you rather be spending money down the road to fix bigger problems because you haven't been compassionate, you haven't been thoughtful, you haven't been open to the needs of folks that you consider to be less worthy than others? Sorry, I'm on a rant. It's what I do.
I love your rants.
Very, very, very passionately about this particular issue in particular, because you know, A, it's the right thing to do, and because we deal with a lot of meanness that I think is totally unnecessary, that's hidden behind, oh, it's not good policy or it's too expensive. Well, figure out how to get to yes and help people's lives. Sorry.
Can I have a question from this audience that is a little more necessary time-wise, or I guess I haven't actually looked at my computer in the last hour. But sorry to yell in your ears. Could you give us I don't think we say Cliff's Notes anymore, Spark Notes, bare bones. What is happening with the government shutdown? What is that? Can you explain?
So that's at the federal level, so I'm not as plugged into the DC stuff. That's not happening here in Olympia.
Right.
But my understanding is that it's.
So if you could just give us your sort of what will happen, what might happen, and what is why is it happening? That's probably going to take us till tomorrow to answer that. But like a 3-minute version.
Yeah. No worries.
Okay.
Oh yeah, sure. 3 minutes on why government is collapsing.
It's happening right now, you guys.
There's a lot of different factors there, and the main factors are the president and his desire to have a lot of different things exactly his way, and but sometimes not a great ability to communicate that clearly. So even yesterday, you saw that the Republican, so in DC, totally opposite of Washington State. Washington State has governor, Democrat, DC, the President Orange, President Cheeto as a Republican, as the top guy. Washington State, the House and the Senate controlled by Democrats, though by just a single vote. Washington D.C. Senate and House of Representatives controlled by Republicans. So you'd think that one party, one sort of set of values, they'd be able to get their act together and move forward. Unfortunately, there's multiple things that they're trying to fit together because they haven't been able to move those things forward. The wall, the wall on the Mexican border, trying to figure out a compassionate way to deal with kids whose families brought them here when they were little, and they're technically illegal, but for crime's sake, they came here when they were 1 year old, and now we're going to send them home 20 years later to some god-awful war-torn country, right? And all that. And so trying to fit all those pieces together, and the government has been not funding itself in a very functional way lately because of this sort of hostage taking, right? I'm not going to do this until you do that. I'm not going to fund the government until I get my way on this. And sometimes that's folks in Congress, sometimes that's the president. And so I think it's just a lot of collisions of different things all at the same time, and the ability for the Congress to hold government funding hostage in order to, sort of have a gun to people's heads to try to resolve everything at once. Whether they're going to be able to do that, I haven't had the chance to look at the news in the last hour either. It looks like they're going over that cliff. So what does that mean? It means that non-essential government personnel stay home, right? So unless you're needed to keep people safe, or you're needed to, process emergency stuff, you're home. So somebody who is collecting taxes for the IRS, right? They're going to stay home, right? There's no money that's going to be coming in from them collecting taxes because they're not essential. They don't protect the safety. Somebody who is cleaning the toilets at Mount Rainier or, National Park, they'll stay home because one might differ with this. I don't feel very safe if my toilets aren't cleaned at some of those parks. But, that's a quote unquote non-essential government function. And so the toilets aren't going to get, those are little examples just off the top of my head. But those are things that are considered non-essential that when government shuts down. Everybody pretty much who works in a government office for the federal government, right? Again, unless it's out there, protecting the public in some way in a direct fashion, they're all going to stay home and not get paid, right? Through no fault of their own. They're ready to do their job. And because the 536 people at the top can't agree on how to move forward with funding these essential services, these folks go without a paycheck for a little while. So whether that's an hour or a day or a week or a month, we don't know. But that's sort of the government shutdown, is that, deadlines are used as, the ability to take hostages. Unless you do what I want by this deadline, you're not going to get paid, right? So that's sort of the dynamics around the government shutdown. Does that make sense? And it's only happened a couple times in the history of the country, but now the risk of it happens every couple months because the folks who are running the country right now aren't communicating very effectively. You had yesterday the top Republican in the U.S. Senate saying, "I'm willing to do what the president wants, but I don't know what he wants." Literally. And when there's that, again, these are literally two of the three most powerful people in Washington, D.C., and they're not talking clearly to each other. The heck. So regardless of partisanship, that's just, that's no way to run the most powerful country in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to hear someone on the inside sort of explain the nuts and bolts, because I get a little bit.
Absolutely.
I talk about it. I
understand why the problem is there. I can only explain the dynamics.
Thank you. I think that's our time for today, Nick. It was wonderful to see you again. How's your son, your little one?
My little daughter is fantastic.
excuse me.
It's all good. It's all good. When they're little, they all look like Winston Churchill, so it's hard to tell. But yeah, I have a 19-month-old, and she is fantastic, and truly keeping me young at age 51.
Good to
Keeping
hear.
her around, and my 20-year-old is also doing well. And boy, they love each other. So life is very, very good in the Federici household. You know, under the dome, a little more complicated.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
It was good to see you again, and we'll see you again in a couple weeks. I think I'm going to send you some questions in the next couple days, if that works.
Perfect. Looking forward to it.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Abby. Thanks, Bart. Pleasure to meet you. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Take care.